Welcome back to Midnight Whispers. Don't forget to subscribe, turn off the lights, and let's step into something you can't unhear. I grew up with a strange kind of comfort in solitude. And even though nothing particularly traumatic had ever happened to me during childhood, I always had this low hum of unease around old objects, especially antiques, which made it feel almost predictable when my aunt left me a massive, ornate mirror carved with twisting metal vines and dull silver engravings that seemed to pulse faintly as if they were breathing. And when I placed it in my room the first night I moved into my new apartment, I shrugged off the sense that its surface looked thicker than normal glass, almost like a window filled with heavy water. And as I stood before it, brushing my hair, I noticed how my reflection lagged for the smallest fraction of a second, slow enough that I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but fast enough that something deep in my stomach twisted in warning. And even though I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was exhausted from unpacking, something in the expression of the woman in the glass looked different from mine. Too stiff around the mouth and too flat in the eyes, as if she wasn't copying me, but waiting for me. And I remember the way my voice sounded when I muttered out loud that I needed sleep, because the room had gotten cold in a way that felt directed, like a draft that knew my name. And as I turned off the lamp, the mirror seemed to hold a faint glow, even in the darkness, like the reflection was still there watching me despite the lack of light. And I fell asleep with a sense of being observed not by someone, but by something that had borrowed my shape for reasons I couldn't yet understand. The next morning, when sunlight crept into the room and hit the mirror, I saw myself standing in it exactly as I should have been. And the casual normalcy of it felt almost insulting, as if it were mocking the fear from the night before. But when I tilted my head to the right, I noticed the version of me in the glass tilt her head slightly slower and slightly less far. And the subtle difference was so wrong that I felt heat rush through my chest, though instead of stepping back, I leaned in, watching her pupils dilate just a moment before mine did. And my skin prickled, because that meant she wasn't reacting to me at all, but anticipating me. And the idea that a reflection could think faster or independently made my breathing shake. Yet I couldn't look away, not even when her lips twitched upward into an almost smile that I definitely hadn't made. And I stumbled back so quickly I hit the dresser, knocking over a candle that rolled across the floor like something fleeing the scene. And for the rest of the day, I tried to pretend I was overreacting, convincing myself that maybe the mirror was warped, or the lighting was strange, or maybe I needed more sleep. But every time I passed by my bedroom door, I felt this thick pressure, like the air inside was heavier, because she was in there waiting. And by nightfall, I realized I'd begun avoiding my own room, sitting in the living room with the TV on mute and the lights too bright, pretending Everything was fine, even though my mind kept replaying the wrongness of that almost smile. 2 days later, I gathered the nerve to move the mirror, thinking that if I just relocated it, I could stop feeling like my apartment had grown an extra occupant. But when I gripped the sides to pull it away from the wall, the metal felt warm like flesh, and the surface shimmered faintly, as though the reflection was pressing closer against it. And the version of me inside stared up with an intensity that made me freeze. Her eyes too dark, too focused, following me even when I stepped slightly to the left, where a normal reflection should have broken alignment. And I felt my breath catch because her chest didn't rise and fall with mine anymore. And the horrible realization that she wasn't breathing at all made my throat close. But before I could let go, she lifted her hand, a fraction before I did, and pressed her palm against the inside of the glass with a kind of slow, deliberate curiosity. And the place where her hand touched bloomed with a faint ripple, like a fingertip touching water. And I let out a sound halfway between a gasp and a plea as I yanked my hands away and stumbled backward, my legs barely catching me. And I remember thinking with absolute certainty that the mirror wasn't reflecting me anymore, but copying me, studying me, perfecting me. And the terrible part was that she seemed to be getting better at it. That night, as the apartment grew quiet enough that every creak sounded like a footstep, and every shift of the building felt like someone leaning closer, I heard a soft, dull tapping from my bedroom, as if someone were knocking gently from inside the glass. And even though my entire body screamed not to check, curiosity mixed with terror dragged me toward the door. And when I cracked it open, the room was darker than it should have been, like the shadows pooled thicker near the mirror, and the surface glinted faintly with movement, even though I was still by the doorway. And when I whispered a shaking, greeting the version of me inside slowly stepped into view, her face too calm and her smile too smooth. And she lifted her hand in a slow wave that felt mocking, almost playful. And I watched in horror as she began mimicking a version of me that I wasn't doing, tilting her head in an elegant predator-like curiosity, and parting her lips as if forming a word, though no sound came through. And the realization that she wasn't mirroring, but performing, made something in my brain beg me to run. Yet, I couldn't because she suddenly leaned closer, as if pressing her ear to the inner surface of the glass, as though she could hear my heartbeat pounding so loudly, it felt like the room vibrated with it. And then she mouthed something I couldn't fully read, but understood perfectly. Let me out. I didn't sleep after that, instead sitting on the couch with the lights on, and every muscle in my body tense enough to hurt, convincing myself that morning would dilute the terror like it usually does. But when dawn finally dragged itself across the sky, and I cautiously approached my bedroom, I felt a sickening dread bloom wide in my chest, because the mirror was fogged from the inside, streaked as if someone had pressed their hands and face against it over and over throughout the night. And when I stepped closer, the fog cleared just enough to show her standing there, inches from the surface, her hair draped differently from mine, and her eyes too bright with a hunger that didn't belong to any human expression I had ever seen. And even though I wasn't moving, she began to mimic walking motions, like she was pacing inside a cage, occasionally glancing toward the edges as though testing for weak spots. And my hands trembled so violently, I had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. And the worst moment came when she paused, stared directly at me, and slowly placed both hands against the inside of the glass, while her mouth curved into a grin so wide it strained the shape of her face. And then she leaned forward until her forehead pressed the surface and whispered, though no sound escaped, a single word that I could read from the tension in her jaw. Soon, by the sixth night, I was unraveling, hearing faint breathing that wasn't mine whenever I passed the mirror, seeing movement in the glass even when I wasn't near it, and feeling this strange pull, as though the version of me inside was trying to draw me closer with invisible strings. And I felt my sanity fraying every time I saw her, because she no longer mimicked any part of my expression or posture, but instead stared at me like a scientist studying a creature she had grown bored with. And I realized, with a slow, cold horror, that she wasn't trying to escape into my world. She was trying to lure me into hers. And each time I dared look into the mirror, I saw not my bedroom behind me, but a darker version of it, warped and unfamiliar, with angles that bent wrong and shadows that moved like they were breathing. And I understood then that the glass wasn't just reflective, but a boundary. And she wanted me to break it, to step forward, to merge with the version of reality she came from. And the last time I looked, I saw her reach toward me with both hands, not touching the glass, but reaching as though the barrier had thinned. And I felt this strange warmth on my skin, like her fingers were inches from my face. And I ran, slamming the bedroom door, knowing deep in my bones that the mirror was no longer containing her, but waiting for the moment I got tired, slipped up, or forgot that she was still in there, practicing the perfect version of my smile.